How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another Christmas bread video. Today we're making a delicious Italian classic, Panettone, and I've turned this into a no-knead recipe, so it's super simple. It has a nice moist crumb, it's flavored with citrus, loaded with dried fruit and candied peel. It has a crispy nutty glaze on top. I mean, what's not to love? And a slow cold fermentation brings extra depth of flavor. But it doesn't just add flavor, it also adds convenience. You can mix this dough, stick it in the fridge and forget about it. You can fit it around your schedule, so there are no excuses to not making this. So let's get right to it and see what we need. You'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a brush, a couple of panettone molds and a grater for the citrus zest. There's one more thing we need, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now on to the ingredients. We want some strong white bread flour, some soft butter, sugar, yeast, egg yolks, water, salt, honey, vanilla paste, orange zest and lemon zest. We'll need some raisins, mixed candied peel, some apricots. And for the glaze, we'll need some egg whites, sugar, almonds, hazelnuts, cocoa powder and some flour. And lastly, some sugar pearls to decorate. These are all the ingredients that we need. The dough itself will be split up in 3 parts. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's just start by making the topping and get it out of the way. So grab a tall cup or a jug and then combine all the ingredients for the glaze. The sugar, the flour, the nuts, the cocoa powder and the egg whites. To make the glaze, we will need another piece of equipment, a blender. If you don't have a stick blender, you can use a food processor. Or whatever you use, make sure you blend the paste until it's nice and smooth. You need to be able to brush it on. If you don't want to mess around with the paste, you can simply bake your panettone as it is, naked. It'll still be super tasty. It's just that the glaze adds a nice crispy topping to it. Now transfer the glaze to a bowl and leave it on the side until we need it. You can actually make this just before you bake the bread. And speaking of bread, let's just start the process. And it all starts with a pre-ferment or a sponge. We're going to take part of the water, all of the yeast and part of the total flour. Mix them together and let it proof. The reason for this is to get the fermentation going. Because after we add the second set of ingredients, the dough will go straight into the fridge, so it needs some fermentation before we refrigerate it. Otherwise, nothing would happen. So mix your ingredients and leave them for about an hour. It should puff up nicely and be full of bubbles. And this looks perfect. Now we can make what I call the first dough. So to this mix, you want to add your egg yolk, the water, the sugar and the butter. Because we're not kneading this dough, adding the ingredients in the right order and mixing them properly is super important. So before we add the flour here, we need to mix this properly. Break up the butter, dissolve the sugar. Make sure that everything is as smooth as it can be. You could also use a whisk for this. And now we can add the flour. And mix it well. Mix until there's no dry flour left and everything's nice and smooth. Scrape down the sides of the bowl, collect the dough into the middle. And now we can cover it up and leave it for the first cold proof. This kind of recipe gives great flexibility of when to take the next baking step. You can leave this dough in the fridge for as little as 12 hours, or you can go up to 24 hours, or even 48 if you really don't have time or your plans change. I left mine in the fridge for 24 hours, and it's puffed up beautifully. Look at all those air bubbles. So it's the second day, and we can make the second dough. All we need to do is combine the rest of the ingredients and add them to this. And of course, because we're not kneading it, there's a certain way of doing it. So you want to mix all the second dough ingredients in a separate bowl first. So add your water, the egg yolk, the vanilla paste, the honey, the salt, the sugar, the citrus zest, and we want to mix everything well again. We want to dissolve the salt and dissolve the sugar. Make sure all the ingredients are distributed evenly. Once you've mixed it all up and the salt and sugar is dissolved, add the butter and then break the butter up into smaller chunks. Trust me, it's easier to do this now than it would be later when we're trying to squeeze the dough together by hand. Next up, add the remaining flour and mix again. And finally, add the raisins, the mixed peel and the apricots. By now your kitchen should be full of delicious smells. It's just too bad that we have to wait a bit longer until we can bake this. So give it all a final mix and we'll be ready to combine the first dough with the second dough. And this is the only part of the recipe where we actually have to do something. Actual physical effort is what I mean. Pop a can of elbow grease. But don't worry, it's nothing complicated. Just wet your hand with some water and squeeze the two doughs together. Really go for it. You want the dough to come out between your fingers. Squeeze it as hard as you can. The main goal here is to combine all the ingredients properly. You want the dough to be nice and smooth. This will take a couple of minutes. There should be no lumps when you're finished. Once you're done, make sure to take all the dough off your hand, because that's about half a loaf there. Then grab a spatula or your dough scraper and scrape it all together. Make sure the sides of the bowl are nice and clean. You don't want it getting crusty in the fridge. And that's it. That's our dough done. That's how you make a no-knead panettone dough. Simple as that. Now we can cover this up and leave it for another cold proof. And just as we did with the first dough, this can stay in the fridge for as little as 12 hours or up to 24. But you could actually leave it in the fridge for up to 48 hours. It is totally up to you. It's just a good way of making the recipe stick to your schedule. It's not going to puff up as much as it did earlier, but trust me, it has fermented. The dough will be quite sticky, so we need to use plenty of flour when handling it. Dust it generously, leave no inch uncovered. Now release it from the bowl using your scraper. Now drop it out on the table with the flour side down. Now dust the bottom side with flour as well. You really don't want this sticking. And if you feel that it starts sticking, just add more flour. You want to flatten it out so it's nice and round, and then divide it into two. This recipe makes two 500 gram panettones. I prefer making two smaller ones than one large one. It's easier to bake. And by the way, you can find the panettone molds in my Amazon shops, link down below. But you can of course make it in a cake tin. Right, so after dividing, shape them into balls. Fold the edge over, going around in a circle to reach point where you started. Then turn the smooth side up again and round it off using the palms of your hands. And again, if it's sticking, use a bit more flour. Don't wait until it starts getting too sticky. Just as soon as you feel it sticking, dust it with a bit more flour. Trust me, once it starts sticking to your hands and to the table, you're not gonna have a good time. Right, in the molds they go. So one last dusting of flour, just to make them easier to handle. Pick them up, make sure one last time that they're nice and even. Click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Then pop your dough balls into the molds and press them down to fit the shape. And from here, you have a couple of choices. You could either cover these up, put them in the fridge and take them out before you want to proof them. You can leave them on the table at room temperature and wait for them to rise. Or you can put them in the oven with the light on, so it's nice and warm. And that would be the quickest option, because they will take some time to rise. I left mine on the table at room temperature, which is 22 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and they took 18 hours to rise. So I shaped them up in the afternoon. They were ready by the next morning. The good thing is that you can shape them and forget them, just leave them. You can make this in the morning and go to work, but regardless of what you do, 1 hour before baking, preheat your oven, 160 degrees Celsius with the fan on. That's 320 degrees Fahrenheit for my American friends. And once your panettones have almost reached the top of the molds, they're ready. Now we can glaze them. Be gentle now, because they are super fragile. Don't poke the dough too much, because you don't want to deflate it. Just don't rush this step, take your time. I decided to add some almonds at the end. I'm going to finish decorating it with the sugar pearls. You could use different nuts, or just use the glaze with nothing else. It's up to you. But the sugar pearls and the nuts give it a nice crunch. And the glaze itself creates a nice crispy layer too. Now make some space between them. That little detail gives us a nice even bake. So let's pop these in the oven. We'll bake them for 30 minutes. But that's only the first part of the bake. These will need an hour in the oven. But if we left them like this for an hour, the top would burn before the bread would be ready. So after 30 minutes, take it out and cover with some foil. And back in the oven they go for another 30 minutes of baking. And that's all you need to do. After this, we'll just let them cool down and enjoy. I'd suggest leaving it to cool down for at least 12 hours. These smell absolutely amazing, and the taste is like nothing else. The crumb is so moist, and with all the citrus and butter and all the dried fruit, definitely one of the best Christmas breads out there. And one of the simplest ones as of now. So what do you think of this recipe? Have you made panettone before? Let me know down in the comments. And if you have any questions or suggestions, also let me know. And check out the Breads of Christmas playlist. It's full of recipes for festive bakes from all over the world. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, because if you love bread and baking, you've come to the right place. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.